get started on Chapter 4, Configuring File and Share Access. In this chapter, we will discuss the file server role, sharing, mapping a network drive, share permissions, NTFS permissions, inheritance, effective permissions, shadow copy, and quotas. Let's start out with the file server. A file server is a computer, a centralized computer, with a big hard disk that everybody can save data to. So why should we have a file server? Why not just have the users save their data to the hard disks on their own individual PCs? The disadvantage of having users save data to the hard disk on their own individual PC is that when a user goes to another computer, then the user is unable to get to his or her files. What we do is we tell the user, save the files up to the file server hard disk. If the user save the file to the file server hard disk, then the users can get to their data regardless of the workstation they are logged onto. The reason we have a file server is so users can get to their data regardless of the workstation they are logged into. And the second reason for having a file server is so many people can work on the same file at the same time. So many people can work on the same project. And the buzzword for this is called collaboration. So a file server allows many people to access the same files. The file server role is the software that allows the server to act as a file server, and the file server role is already installed by default. If we go to Server Manager, we do not need to go over to Manage and select Add Roles. You will notice that the file server role is already installed on the server. We don't need to install it. Now let's discuss mapping and sharing. To share a folder means to make that folder available so people can connect to it over the network from their workstations. Here is the situation. What we have is a server, and it has a hard disk, and the hard disk is divided into folders. And we have one folder which has accounting information in it. And we want the users at the workstations to be able to get to the data in the accounting folder. So what we do is we share the accounting folder. When you share a folder, what that does is it makes it so users from workstations can then connect to that folder so they can access the files in that folder. After you share a folder, then the user connects to that shared folder, and that is called mapping a network drive. Mapping a network drive is where a user makes a connection to a shared folder on the server, and the connection is assigned a drive letter. So let's go to the server and share a folder using the Windows Explorer. Here is the accounting folder that we want people to be able to access, and here are the accounting files we want people to be able to access. So if I go to the accounting folder and I right-click and I select Properties, and I click on the Sharing tab, I can see that currently the accounting folder is not shared. Well, I would like to share it. And to share the folder, instead of clicking on Share, we click on Advanced Sharing. If we click on Advanced Sharing, we see a checkbox that says Share this folder. So to share the folder, the only thing we have to do is click on the checkbox that says Share this folder, and that's it. That's all you have to do. This folder is now shared, and now users can connect to it over the wire. After the folder is shared, then users connect to it over the wire, and that is called mapping a network drive. So to map a network drive, the user at the workstation, so we go to the Windows 7 workstation, the user goes to the Windows Explorer, and under the network icon, the user right-clicks and selects Map Network Drive. If the user knows the name of the server and the name of the shared folder, the user can just type the name of the server and the name of the shared folder. But the user probably can't remember the name of the shared folder, so if the user just clicks on the Browse button, the user gets a list of all of the servers that are up and running, and the user can see that the accounting folder is shared on server 1. So we click on OK. So now the Z drive is mapped to the accounting folder on server 1. So now if the user saves to the C drive, the user will be saving to his or her own hard disk on his or her own workstation. But if the user saves to the Z drive, the user is actually saving to the accounting folder on server 1. To look at it another way, when we map a network drive, if the user saves to the C drive, the user will be saving to the hard disk on his or her own computer. But if the user saves to the Z drive, the user will actually be saving to the accounting folder, which is up on the server. Sharing means making the folder available, and mapping means connecting to a shared folder. The net command is a command line interface that can be used to share a folder or to map a network drive. If I go to the server and I want to share a folder, I use the net share command. I type net share, the share name, followed by the path of the folder that I want to make shared. I press the enter key and the folder is now shared. If I then go to the workstation and I want to map a drive to that shared folder, I use the net use command. I type net use followed by the drive letter I want to assign, followed by the name of the computer I want to connect to, followed by the shared folder. The net command is a command line interface that can be used to share a folder and to map a network drive. So you can see there are several ways of mapping a network drive. You can use the graphical user interface using the Windows Explorer, right-click and select Map Network Drive, or you can use the command line using the net command, or as we will see later on in this class, you can use group policy to map network drives. We will discuss group policy later on in the class. Now let's discuss share permissions. The reason you share a folder is so people can get to it, but the reason we have share permissions is to limit what they can do once they get there. Let's turn our attention to the accounting folder. If I right-click on the accounting folder and select Properties, and I click under the Sharing tab, and I click on Advanced Sharing, I can see, yes, there's the checkbox to indicate that the folder has been shared. But if we click on the button that says Permissions, it specifies who has what permissions to this folder. By default, the Everyone group has the read permission. And if you have the read permission, you can see what's there, but you can't delete it and you can't modify it. So if I do want to give somebody permissions to be able to modify the files here, I will add a user. I will click on Add, click on Advanced, and I can select the user Bob and I can give him permissions to the accounting folder, or I can add a group. If I give permissions to the accounting group, then I will be giving permissions to everybody in the group. I will click on OK and OK. Now if we look at the Everyone group, they just have the share permission. If I look at the accounting group, if I look at the Everyone group, they just have the read permission. If I go to the accounting group, I can see that they just have the read permission. If I want the accounting group to be able to edit and modify and delete files, I click off on the change permission, and the change permission allows users to edit and delete files. That's the accounting group. If I go to the user Bob and I want to give Bob the ability to edit and modify the files, I would click on the checkbox that says Change. If I give Bob the full control permission, that gives him the permission to assign permissions to other users and groups. We typically only give the administrator full control. So share permissions are read, change, and full control. And they can be assigned to an individual user, to a group, or to everyone. Now, let's discuss the limitations of share permissions. As you know, the read permission allows you to see what's there, but you can't edit or delete it. If you give a user the change share permission, then you're giving the user the ability to edit the files and delete the files in the folder. And that's the problem. The problem with that is when you give somebody the change permission, not only do you give them the ability to edit the files, but you give them the ability to delete the files. And the problem is that there is no mechanism to allow the user to edit a file but not delete the file. Here is why you would want that. Imagine the Home Depot inventory database. You would want most of the employees to be able to edit and update the inventory database to indicate that, for example, 500 shovels have been added to the inventory. You do want employees to update and edit the inventory database, but you don't want employees to be able to delete the entire inventory database. The problem with a change permission is there's no mechanism to allow somebody to edit a file and not delete it. And the solution is to implement NTFS permissions. NTFS stands for New Technology File System. Let's look at NTFS permissions. If I go back to the accounting folder and right-click on it and select Properties, this is the Sharing tab. But we're not going to look at the Sharing tab, we're going to look at the Security tab. If I click on the Security tab, that shows the NTFS permissions, and you can see there are many more NTFS permissions than there are share permissions. So let's assign a user NTFS permissions. I will click on Edit, and then I will click on Add, click on Advanced, and if I click on Find Now, it will give me a list of all users and groups. I can assign permissions to just the user Bob, or I could give permissions to a group as well. Now you can see that I have given Bob permissions, and by default Bob has these three permissions: read and execute, list, and read. Read and execute means if it's a data file you can see it but you can't modify it. If it's a program file you can run the program but you can't delete it and you can't modify it. List permission means you can get a list of all of the files but you can't see the contents of the files. And the read permission means you can see the contents of the file, but it doesn't mean you can necessarily edit the file. If you want to give Bob the ability to edit the file, we click on the Write permission, and that allows Bob to edit the file. This would be the perfect example for the Home Depot database. We do want employees to be able to edit the inventory database, but we don't want employees to be able to delete the entire database. That's why we give them the write permission. Now, if we do want to give somebody the ability to delete, then we give them the modify permission. And then beyond that, if I give someone the full control permission, then that gives them the permission to give and take away permissions to other users and groups. NTFS permissions include full control, modify, read and execute, list, read, and write. And they can be assigned to users, they can be assigned to groups. Understanding the Windows permission architecture, a little terminology here. Object Security Principal Access List. The object is the thing that you are assigning permissions to, such as the payroll database. And the security principal is the person or group that you're assigning permissions to. And the ACL, the Access Control List, is a list of who has what permissions. Now let's discuss inheritance. Inheritance means permissions assigned at a higher level flow down to lower level folders. Let's look at an example. If we look at the accounting folder, we can see that the user Sue has been given full control and full permissions to the accounting folder. If she has full control of the accounting folder, then those permissions should flow down to the folder below that called the billing folder. If I look at the billing folder and I look at the properties, I can see that Sue also has full control to the billing folder because she was given full control to the accounting folder, which is right above the billing folder. Now look at the color of these checkboxes. These checkboxes are gray. Let me back up. If we look at the accounting folder, we can see that Sue has full control, but notice the checkboxes are black. If the checkboxes are black, that means Sue was assigned permissions specifically to that folder. But if we look at the billing folder, we can see Sue does have all of those permissions, full control, but notice the checkboxes are gray. If the checkboxes are gray, that means that the permissions were inherited from a higher level folder. So NTFS permissions can be assigned to users or groups. It can be assigned to a folder, or NTFS permissions can be inherited from a higher level folder. And this is the end of part 1.